Hello, and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Derrick Yanford, a Vedic meditation teacher based in New York City, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Thompson in London and Rory Kinsella in Sydney. In this episode, we speak with a very special human, Jesse Israel, a gentleman I have known for less than a year, but who has made a powerful impact on my life and journey as a meditation teacher. Through a unique blend of meditation, community building, and uplifting leadership, Jesse helps people and organizations become their most powerful. He is the founder of the mass meditation movement, The Big Quiet, and the former record label turned tech fund, Cantora, a music company that invests in and develops artists, startup technologies, and live entertainment experiences. Jesse has led some of the largest meditations in the world while working and touring with Oprah Winfrey. He speaks at Fortune 500 companies, teaches meditation to next generation leaders, and is a lover of cheeseburgers, which we'll get more into. Have a listen to Jesse's journey of how he's been able to continue to reinvent himself by creating communities out of his love of music and sharing with others. But don't forget to stick around until the end, where we'll share how you can become involved in the conversation. And remember, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Derrick, Anthony, Rory. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
Jesse, it's interesting because I feel like I have so many questions that I want to ask you that this could last forever. So I actually kind of want to maybe start backwards a little bit. And can you tell us about your love of cheeseburgers? Because I didn't realize that until I did a little bit more research that you had like this whole burger club and stuff like that. So can you just talk about how that started?
Yeah. Well, I've always loved a delicious cheeseburger, but what was particularly special for me about the Burger Boys of New York, which is the name of our burger club, which is since retired. We're all retired members. What's particularly important about the club was it really was my first community building experiment. And I didn't know that it was going to be a community building experiment. It started with me reaching out to 9 of my buddies in New York and saying, "Hey, let's go get burgers at Peter Luger's, a spot in Williamsburg. We'll get the lunch burger." And just men coming together, having a burger and drinking beers. And it was really enjoyable to just kind of. It felt like a birthday dinner, but it was no one's birthday. And it just felt really good to come together and have a reason to come together. And we had a blast. So we said, let's do this every other week. And for the next 2 years, we went and got a different cheeseburger at a different place throughout the 5 boroughs of New York, sometimes in Jersey. And we started to get invited to come to restaurants, and we'd get, hooked up with burgers and free food. And it was all really beautiful and fun. We had a fun burger blog. But what was really happening was it was time for us as men to really connect and be real with each other. It was really the first taste that I had of men's group, kind of disguised through the lens of eating burgers and drinking beers. But it was really a space to explore manhood together. And we were doing this in our mid 20s. So it was a really interesting time to be able to have that space with other men. And it really was the first time in New York City. I was living in New York at the time. I'd been there since I was 18. And it really was the first time in New York where I didn't really feel this kind of underlying sense of loneliness. Felt like I was a part of something, and I loved leading it. I would organize and pick the burger places, and do all the emails, and just felt good to give myself to that. So it was a double whammy. I got to eat delicious burgers and also really build a meaningful community and group of man friends.
You
Yeah,
mentioned. Oh, sorry.
I'm just curious, how long did that last for?
It was a 2 year period,
Okay.
and
Jesse,
we had, yeah.
sorry,
I
I
was
interrupted you.
I was just going to say one of the things that over that 2 year period that really kind of showed me that community building was powerful and that a lot was possible was we started to have other burger chapters pop up run by other gentlemen. So there was the Burger Boys of Stockholm and there was the Burger Boys of Los Angeles, and it was just cool to see other men gathering to have the same experience, really just through a shared purpose. And that was really when I started to learn that people, my belief is what people crave most, or one of the things that people crave most is human connection. And people are just waiting for permission to go there, and that the burgers were a form of connection. Anyways, Anthony, what were you going to say?
Sorry, no, you just mentioned that loneliness was one of the drivers for you starting this. Was that a common theme amongst your fellow burger boys, or were there other themes that became evident as time went by?
It wasn't anything that any of us were expressing or even really felt like we could talk about. But my sense is that everyone felt it to a certain degree because people showed up and they really prioritized the Burger Boy meetups. And I saw and could feel how much it meant to people. So while I didn't hear that from other Burger Boys, I knew that there was something here that was really special because we felt like we belonged to something in a pretty overwhelming city.
I mean, I'm curious about, how it started and ended, only because I feel like you are a person who does start a lot of communities or builds something and then decides, okay, that's maybe run its course, or that chapter is closed and now it's time for me to step back and whatnot. So can you speak about your decision to stop the Burger Boys and what that was like, and how that's maybe framed how you create communities?
Yeah, it's called gluten. No, what started to happen was different dietary interests occurred, and certain Burger Boys were moving to other cities. That was actually probably the main thing. We had about half of the group move to other cities,
Mm.
and we realized that it had run its course, and that it was time to move on. And it just didn't make sense. There just weren't enough of us to continue to gather in a way that felt like the way it did. Um, but what it did for me was it showed me that there was something really powerful in having just a basic purpose to gather people, right? Just a simple reason, or as I said before, permission to have people come together and connect. And that chapter of my life for those 2 years, it was burgers over, a dinner table. But what was clear was that, and what I felt excited about was, how can the canvas be bigger for gathering? You can only fit so many people in a restaurant around a table having burgers.
Mm.
Um, so I was thinking about ways to do it that were more limitless. And I'd always loved riding bikes with friends. It's one of my favorite things, is to ride bikes with friends. Not talking like serious road bikes. I'm just talking like going for a cruise, bringing a speaker, and just riding bikes in the sun. I loved doing it. It always reminded me of childhood. So my next experiment was to see if there was a way to create permission for connection, but within a canvas where there was less containment. So the Cyclones Bike Club was born. Um, I think maybe like a year or two after the Burger Boys ended. Our first ride was 18 people. It was friends I just texted who I knew had bikes in New York, and I said, "Hey, we're forming a bike gang. We're going to meet at the base of the Williamsburg Bridge. It's a surprise destination, and you're not going to know who's going to be there. Come if you like." And 18 people showed up. A lot of them were peers that I knew from different elements of my work world or different elements of my life, but not everybody really knew each other. And it was a little awkward at first, adults going on this group bike ride adventure. We went to the Coney Island roller coaster called the Cyclone, and on our ride back, we decided that we would be a bike club, that we would call ourselves the Cyclones. Everyone had it's kind of like this summer camp energy of connecting. We had been through this day of adventure and fun, and it was a little uncomfortable, a little vulnerable, and it was exciting. And people really got a lot out of it. And we decided that we would invite our friends to the next one 2 weeks later. We followed that same cadence of every other week. And by the end of that summer, we had hundreds of people showing up on these bike rides, and we would just take over the streets, 5, 6 city blocks. We'd just be cruising. We'd bring big speakers and attach them to our bicycles. And it was beautiful to witness people falling in love, people getting engaged, people starting businesses together, all through meeting through this kind of shared environment of going on adventures on two wheels. So that was sort of the next step for me in experimenting with that stuff.
I just want to unpack a phrase that I think you've mentioned twice, which is this permission for connection. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I've never really heard anybody say that before.
My hunch is that lots of people are lonely, and we know that this is increasing if we're willing to believe a lot of the science and research around technology, that we are becoming lonelier as a people the more we're becoming connected to our devices and technology. Um, and what my hunch has been over the past several years and continues to be a strong hunch is that most people, or let's just say lots and lots of people, want deeper connection in their lives. They want human connection. They want more of it than they currently have access to. But for whatever reason, I think a lot of it has to do with just the way that we're raised culturally in our society. We really tend to stick to ourselves. And I remember this experience so well taking the subway in New York City for the 17 years I lived there. Being on the subway, being surrounded by hundreds of people, passing by thousands of people just to get to work every morning, and literally not talking, looking at, or communicating with one other person. Being surrounded by people, yet we're all totally alone. And there was something poetically sad about that. And I think it's just true for a lot of people, regardless if you live in New York or not. And that a lot of people are just waiting for someone to say, hey, it's okay for us to connect, right? If it's just kicking up a conversation, if it's introducing ourselves, if it's some fun activity to get us in a space where we can go there. What I've seen is that people are waiting for a person, a leader, a brand, some voice to give them that connection, to give them that permission to have that connection. And then once people get a taste of it, they're like, oh, I feel like a human again. And this is why it's become such an important part of my work with MediClub and the Big Quiet, to incorporate space where we can really talk about real stuff and have the opportunity to turn to someone that you didn't come to the event with and tell them what you had for breakfast, or tell them about your first crush, or whatever the icebreaker may be, and then see what unfolds from there.
So when did meditation come into you, and then when did you decide to bring this community idea to meditation?
Right after the Burger Boys ended, this is over 10 years ago, I found myself feeling really lonely. And I was working hard running a record label that I had started with my sophomore roommate, and was just pushing myself, had no real context or understanding around what it meant to look out for my own well-being. And I mirrored my, I would say, entrepreneurial and party habits based off of other people I saw in the music industry. And what I saw was, you just kind of work hard, you push hard, you don't sleep, you just kind of get it. And I tried that for a little while, and I fried. I was burnt out in my early 20s, and didn't even know what that meant or what that was. But I realized there was an issue when I was having panic attacks, because I thought I was dying. Panic attacks are terrible, terribly uncomfortable, and my anxiety was becoming so debilitating. And I'd get home from my office, in my early 20s, and I'd look at myself and be like, I look sick. This isn't sustainable. There wasn't a place to talk about it. In the music industry, I didn't feel like there was much of a conversation, a safe conversation around it. As a man, I felt like it was not a dialogue to have. The Burger Boys had disbanded, so I didn't really have that space. And I was looking at ways to cope with my stress and my internal discomfort. And my dad, who's an amazing man, my roommate right now, said to me, hey, you should check out meditation. He'd been really interested in some of the Buddhist work of Pema Chodron. And he said, I hear it's really good for stress. I hadn't, he wasn't practicing it much. I had never practiced it, but I checked it out based on my dad's recommendation. So I went to a little meditation studio in New York. This is before we had all of these brands around meditation. There were no meditation apps. This is, maybe 12 years ago, something like that. I went to a little meditation studio, and there was, I learned a Buddhist lineage meditation practice, a little 30-minute free intro course. I loved what I learned, but I did not feel like I fit in the community. It was very sleepy and didn't feel like it was accessible to me. But I left with this beautiful practice that I went and practiced on my own. And in a very short period of time, I found that the relief that it was bringing to some of the challenges that I described was really tremendous. And it was this thing that I was really committed to. And it only took about 8 months for a friend of mine who knew that I was into this weird meditation thing to go, hey, I've been hearing, and my friends are learning meditation in LA with a teacher who teaches Vedic meditation, this guy named Light Watkins. You should check him out. And I had no idea what Vedic meditation was, but I went to an intro talk that Light Watkins did, and we really hit it off. And I went for the course. I was given my mantra and just loved all of the elements of Vedic meditation. And having practiced Buddhist meditation for maybe 8 months or so before it, I was able to say, this Vedic practice feels like it's a better fit for me personally. And it started this really beautiful journey with meditation.
Amazing. So yeah, how did you translate that personal experience into community for meditation?
Well, the first thing was that people were noticing a change in me. My peers in the music industry, the people that I knew from places I was partying in New York, the entrepreneur space, my family members, it was clear that I was moving a lot more into myself. I was a lot less in my head and becoming just a lot clearer about who I was in the world. I had more vitality. I had more clarity, more enthusiasm. I felt healthier. I was finally sleeping. I wasn't having panic attacks and was experiencing less intense stress. And I think it was just noticeable. And also, when people would ask me about it, I would light up when I would talk about it. You could ask Light Watkins. I sent him over 200 students. And it was just because people, I kind of became an individual who was passionate about meditation. I wasn't teaching it at the time. I was still running my record label, but I was passionate about it, and people would come and ask me about it. And they would see me meditating at, industry events, like I would get my second meditation in at a music festival backstage, and where everyone else was just wiped going into the evening and would need to, blow things into their nose or consume certain liquids to energize them. I had this really natural way to just give my body the rest that I needed so I could show up and then go enjoy whatever was going on at the rest of the festival. Way more sustainable than the sort of zombie partying that I'd been doing for so long. So I'd be at festivals getting these deep rest meditations, and people in the music industry would ask me about it. And then I started to find other people in the music biz who had learned TM or Vedic meditation or whatever the practice was. And then we started meditating together at festivals. And there was something so beautiful about a group of people sharing quiet while literally noise and chaos is just all around us. 7, 8 stages at Coachella, all blasting music at the same time. It creates this sort of like sound. And then we're there in total silence. And then after we'd meditate, we'd talk a little bit about what was going on in our lives. And I started to realize I wasn't the only person going through these mental health challenges or this internal discomfort in the music biz. In fact, I was realizing most of us were. No one had permission to talk about it. And I started to realize that there was an opportunity to meditate with my peers that weren't going to that, Buddhist lineage studio where I initially learned, but that I could do it with people I knew from the music industry, that other people with different styles of practices could practice together, and that there was space to talk about the real things that were going on in our lives because we weren't doing it otherwise. But it seemed that after we meditated, after we'd go in, people felt more comfortable going out, right? Outward, having that dialogue, communicating in that deeper level, returning to that sort of lost art of socializing where we're talking about those deeper layers of our lived experience. And that's what inspired me to go, I want to start organizing meetups in New York where my peers from my modern life could come and we could share in quiet together. And then we could talk about what's going on in our lives. And that's what led to the first Medi Club being born, which was over 6 years ago. And I wound up leaving my record label maybe 8 or 9 months before that because I knew I wanted to give myself to some of this community building stuff. I didn't know what it looked like. But I wound up experimenting with what became Medi Club. I experimented with gathering people to meditate and have conversations. Shout out to Emily Fletcher, formerly a Vedic meditation teacher. Now she teaches something called Ziva meditation. She was a teacher of mine that I came to, and I said, I'm feeling called to create a space where people, like modern people, can come and just meditate together. But I'm not a meditation teacher. Can I, gather people to come together and share quiet in that way, or is that, wrong? And she said, do it. And she kind of advised me on the first couple sessions. She really gave me that permission. And then they just started to grow. First one was 20, just like with Burger Boys, Cyclones, the bike club, right? This one, Medi Club, 20 people, meditation, kind of awkward, all silent, in my buddy's loft in Soho. And then I shared about some of my, whatever I was going through at the time. I was going through all this self-doubt stuff, trying to make sense of what I wanted to do for my career next. And I just put it out on the table. And then other people in the group started doing it as well. And we all just had this really beautifully connected conversation. And I realized, ooh, the meditation is a form of permission. And then me sharing vulnerably and honestly is also a really meaningful form of permission for others to do the same. And then that was just the sort of the ingredients. That was the system. Come together in my buddy's loft. We meditate. Model that it's okay to talk vulnerably by sharing first. And then every month, more and more people would come, and we were able to share in this experience. And I just saw people needed this. People wanted it. There was something that was happening there that was really helping people. There was a need that was being served through what we were creating. And I just continue to give myself to that. And the Big Quiet was born out of that.
You mentioned that you really enjoyed your Vedic meditation. And I'm intrigued by, well, I'd like to know, what is the style of meditation you were teaching when you were getting these big gatherings together? Was it mindfulness? Was it a led meditation?
Well, for the first 5 or 6 months, I wasn't teaching anything. I wasn't guiding anything. It was just, hey, if you're already meditating, come and we all meditate together, and then we talk. So for the first several months, people would show up, we'd sit down, we'd close our eyes, we'd meditate, and then we'd talk. But what I started to realize was happening was that people were hearing about these gatherings from their friends. There was very strong word of mouth around Medi Club. And people were showing up. A lot of people were showing up, and a lot of them had never meditated before. And it became a disservice to have people sit down without any instruction, because they were having that experience of, they think meditation's a certain thing. No one's guiding them or teaching them. They get frustrated. They think, it's about not thinking or whatever that, misconception may be. And then they'd get frustrated, and then it would turn them off to meditation. And I realized that was a disservice. And I had to face this thing that I was dealing with, which was that I didn't feel like it was right for me to guide meditations. And my teacher, Johnny Pollard, also a Vedic meditation teacher, who is now still my teacher and mentor today, had been leading mass meditations in Australia through something called One Giant Mind. And he had said to me, it's time for you to step up. I will work with you so you can feel comfortable to guide meditations, mass meditations. He was like, you're not a meditation teacher, but you're going to learn how to be able to guide mass meditations. And when you're ready to learn, then you go through a training. So he supported me in learning how to start to lead meditations at Medi Club and at the Big Quiet. It's essentially a mindfulness practice that pulls from, I would say, some Vedic principles, and that it's a mindfulness practice that really generates deep rest for the individual who's practicing it. And to this day, at Big Quiet events, I will guide people in a pretty straightforward mindfulness practice. We use sound bowls, and that really helps people further de-excite. And we keep it relatively accessible, because what we love at our events is that we have about half the people are meditators and half the people are brand new to meditation. So we try to find that sweet spot. And then eventually Medi Club became a space where we would book a different meditation instructor every month to guide the group in meditation. So people could then learn different styles of meditation. So it wasn't just Jesse leading the group. It was different instructors. And when Medi Club comes back, it's now run by Jackie Cantwell in New York. That will continue to be the case. A different instructor every month, taking the people through a different practice.
in your own personal meditation practice, are you using a Vedic meditation technique and a Vedic mantra?
Yeah, yeah, I practice with the Vedic mantra. I learned Vedic meditation from Light Watkins, from Emily Fletcher, Johnny Pollard, Tom Knowles, Charlie Knowles, a lot of teachers that I've spent time with, and I love my practice.
I'm intrigued because if the value of your Vedic meditation is so great, why aren't you teaching that?
Well, I decided that I wanted to start teaching about 4 years ago. So, and the way that made most sense for me to teach something similar to the Vedic technique was to do the One Giant Mind teacher training, which I know Derrick has done as well. And my teacher, my Vedic teacher, one of my Vedic teachers, Johnny Pollard, created this program. And it's not Vedic meditation, although there's a lot of similarities. Um, and it felt like a really great and accessible way to be able to learn how to learn how to teach it, and also bring it to individuals and really get people connecting with being, really get people practicing on a regular basis, not just coming to our events and meditating, which is what we saw most people were doing. And at some point, I would love to do the actual Vedic training. But in the meantime, doing the One Giant Mind teacher training has been incredibly valuable because I've been able to offer that to people. Also, I do a lot of work in corporations and with executives. And I've found that there are some kind of simplified and modernized components of the One Giant Mind technique that has allowed me to, I think, teach more people in the corporate space because they feel maybe more comfortable practicing it. So it's been a cool middle ground to be able to teach that, and I look forward to when I'm able to do the Vedic training in India.
How's the community aspect been over the last year? We've obviously all had restrictions around gathering. How have you dealt with that as someone who's had so much experience in bringing people together?
It's been tough. I mean, in some ways, I was relieved to be kind of forced into a break and to not be around people so much. But ultimately, so much of what I love about my work is being with other humans. I mean, you've heard me talk a lot about human connection and creating the permission for people to have that connection. And in many ways, that's been lost over the past year and a half. And it feels like there's a little part of me, maybe it's a big part of me, that feels incomplete because I haven't been able to use that gift of mine to gather in that way. And I've tried various ways to explore this through the Big Quiet and virtually, and Derrick has witnessed a lot of it. We've been trying to build community around teaching meditation and really giving people a practice, not just sitting for a guided meditation. So we've been experimenting with different stuff and learning, and there's been some really cool ways to feel the sense of that virtually. I love that now when I teach a course, when I actually teach a meditation course, One Giant Mind course, that the people who I'm teaching are from all over the world instead of just in whatever city I'm teaching in. So, those kind of elements have been really cool, but ultimately I think there's nothing like the in-person experience. And I'm really excited to get back out there soon. I will also say that I kind of learned the hard way building community around meditation, especially through MediClub. We were doing it every single month up until the pandemic. So probably almost 5 years before the pandemic, that I have burnt myself out pretty significantly several times building community. And it's a very real thing. And for people who might be listening, who may be community builders or starting to step up and lead through gathering humans, it's just so important that when we start to notice the symptoms of burnout, that we give ourselves permission to take breaks. Because I got really kind of lost in what's a very common experience with pastors and rabbis. Not to compare myself to a pastor or a rabbi, but that I hear it constantly from my friends who are, which is feeling like we need to keep showing up for the people. We need to keep making sure that we are there for people who need us or who need our communities. And we start to place that need over our own need for rest and maintaining our own well-being. And I've fallen into that several times, and it leads to a lot of fatigue around doing the work. And I would say that I'm still recovering from that in some ways too.
Do you have a team of people working with you? Have you sort of built a community of co-workers?
Yeah, I have a great team. The best, simply the best. Derrick knows Emily. She's incredible. Emily is my business partner. Also, she manages my personal career. She's my business partner at the Big Quiet and manages my personal stuff. And I also had to learn that one the hard way. I had to learn that me taking it all on myself, especially with something that was amorphous and there wasn't a clear business model, right? How do you monetize group meditations? And you're talking to a guy who was running a record label and had a tech fund, and a lot of my friends are entrepreneurial, and money and fundraising and revenue and growth and scale and all these things I do identify with, and definitely associated those elements with my personal identity. So when I first started doing my work in this space, it was really weird for me. I was just like, what am I doing? And I would have this really unique internal battle of, wow, this work feels so good because it's serving a need and it's lighting people up. And it's so incredibly gratifying to give myself to this work. And then I'd go to this place of, yeah, but how are you going to make a living doing this? How are you going to talk about this at Thanksgiving with your relatives? There was this very left brain element of it that was really challenging for me to make sense of. And that was all kind of wrapped up in me thinking that the way to do it was to do it on my own with volunteers. And that worked for a period of time. And I'm so grateful for the volunteers at Medic Club and Big Quiet in the first year. They were critical to getting us to being able to turn it into a real business. But, Anthony, we reached that point where it was clear that if we wanted to keep serving the need, and this need that was so clearly needed, that we needed to be able to charge, and we needed to be able to turn it into a for-profit business that allowed us to really focus on doing the work and not on fundraising as a nonprofit or relying on volunteers. And I had all sorts of learnings around how to find the right people for this type of work, because it is very unique work. There's a lot of emotion in this work, as I know all three But I was able to find a pretty cool balance. And my decision was, at least up to this point, has been to have a very lightweight team. So we have very low overhead. We're very agile. We can work from anywhere. We have no full-time employees, which is something that's been what I used to think that was uncool. But now I just feel so grateful that we have such a lightweight team and that we're able to do a lot with that.
What are your plans for the future?
Well, the thing that I'm feeling most excited about right now with the Big Quiet, and with a lot of my personal work too, is so I moved to LA last year and I grew up here. I have my experience in the music business. I love working with musicians and working with people who drive culture. And I'm really interested right now in how the Big Quiet and I can align with more of the people who are really driving culture today, especially the individuals who are driving culture and influencing younger generations. I'm talking about the major musicians, the sports figures, the business leaders, the politicians, right? The people who are really driving culture, and working with them and finding meaningful partnerships to bring them into this world. A lot of them are already practicing meditation or passionate about community, and a lot of their fans may not know about it, but finding really meaningful and unique ways to collaborate and work with those individuals so we can bring this stuff to more people. What I've seen through the Big Quiet at all of our events, after we do the mass meditation, people open their eyes, and we'll book musicians to perform when people open their eyes. So it's part mass meditation, part concert. And our most successful events are when the musicians that we book are not necessarily musicians who are making spiritual music or Eastern music, but they're musicians who you'd find on Pitchfork or pop culture musicians. And there's something about the juxtaposition of we just meditated, and now we're going to hear from Miguel, the R&B star who we've done some work with, that I think really creates a whole new access point for people. I know when we did our event with Miguel, we did it at South by Southwest. We had a we did a mass meditation right there. And Miguel, who's a big R&B star, he also is a really dedicated meditator and really passionate about all the stuff we're talking about on this call. And he has millions of fans. And, he's a radio musician. And when we were able to partner on this Big Quiet, he went on his Instagram leading up to the event, and he was saying, Austin, I can't wait to meditate with you. Come through the Big Quiet. Here's the address. It was a free event. And at the event, when people open their eyes from the meditation, Miguel performing some of his hits, but with, we did a string orchestra of musicians. So these really beautiful, lush versions of his songs, and him thanking the audience for meditating with him. And all of these people who had probably never meditated before, or maybe were interested, but didn't think it was for them, or maybe had the experience that I had early days in the music biz, which was that I was going through my own mental health stuff, but not talking about it. And you have this public figure celebrating it and sharing it with people and making it cool and accessible. And it was so cool for me to lead that meditation, to see the audience that showed up for the event. It was a lot of young people, and they didn't really seem like they were that necessarily interested in the meditation leading up to it. I think they just wanted to see Miguel, but Miguel meditated with everybody. He created that permission for people to go there. And leading the meditation, I was able to watch all of these attendees crying, going really deep. I know you guys all know the transcending head bob. A lot of those in the audience. People are fried from South by Southwest. And then getting the feedback afterwards from all of these young people who are like, I've never done that before. That was so powerful. How do I do more of it? And then seeing Miguel validate it. That stuff is really interesting to me, because so much of what lights me up in my work is serving the need in a way that really shifts our culture. And I think music in particular is such a meaningful way to influence and access culture. So finding more of those types of partnerships feel really exciting to me. So we're talking to some major labels about doing some interesting stuff with the Big Quiet, creating content. And we will continue to be touring the Big Quiet, which is something we were doing before the pandemic, which pulls a lot of inspiration from my time in the music business, where we would tour musicians. We tour the Big Quiet. So we'll do, 2 cities, 2 days in a city, and then we go to the next city, and then we go to the next city. In each city, we partner with a landmark. We host a mass meditation. Thousands of people come together. We get to have this experience. There's great music. There's great food. We work with awesome brands. And then we go to the next city. So we're going to be doing a big tour in 2022, where we'll be able to continue to offer those in-person experiences. And the last thing that I'll say is, we think it's really important to also give people access to learning how to meditate, like you asked about, Anthony. Not just, hey, come and sit with us and meditate this one time at our event, but how do we actually provide courses that give people those tools? We've seen that that people are a lot less interested in that. So how can we create more runway so we can raise people up into actually wanting to learn in a meaningful way? And that's something that we're looking at a lot too.
Beautiful.
Speaking of working with influential people, I'd love to hear about your experience with Oprah and how that opened up so many people to talk to.
Oh yeah, that was incredible. Well, the first thing that I'll say was, I mentioned to you guys when we started MediClub over 6 years ago, I had gone to Emily Fletcher and was like, hey, do you think it's okay if I do this meditation thing, right? And she was like, do it. The real inspiration that was kind of pushing me towards that was, I'd always been really interested in Oprah, and I just loved how she created a show and a popular movement around being human and talking about what makes us human, and did it in a way that was so accessible and exciting and celebrated and beautiful. And I always felt like there was an opportunity to create and have an element of that spoke to my generation. So Oprah was a huge inspiration for me to go and actually start MediClub and to start having those conversations. And it was about 5 years, almost to the day of our, when we were on tour with Oprah, and we did our Big Quiet segment at Barclays in New York City. It was 2 days away from our 5-year anniversary of Medi Club, also happening in Brooklyn. It was this really cool full circle experience, and I got to share that with her, and she thought that was really cool. um, and it was one of those moments that reminded me, this is the path to be on. This is something that people need. Nature is supporting this work, because there have been so many times where I've questioned it, so many times where I've almost tapped out. So it was kind of beautiful in a full circle, spiritual way in that way. Um, but it was also just so incredible to be able to have that access, right? To be able to guide mass meditations for full, sold out arenas, 17,000 people at a time,
Hmm.
and to feel. I mean, the best way to describe it is as a feeling. Each one of those meditations, you could feel the group in a way that I'd never felt a human interaction before. And what was so cool about it was, and this is part of what I think is so awesome about Oprah and her team, there are a lot of well-known, or far more well-known, meditation teachers or people in the self-help space that could have, been given that slot on the tour. And they took a really big risk to bring us into it. In fact, I had found out about a week before her tour started in January of 2022 that I was going to be able to speak and guide a meditation just at the first tour stop, which was in Fort Lauderdale. And I was told the night before the event that I was going to be given a 30-minute segment, which is pretty wild, a talk, a guided meditation, and then Oprah and I were going to do a conversation on stage. And that she would just kind of ask me questions in front of this audience. And, we've done some big events through the Big Quiet. Maybe the most we'd ever done was 3,000 or 4,000 people. It's a pretty big event, but an arena full of people, Oprah stage was, just a whole other level. And it was really cool that they just created the space for me to have a shot like that. And we wound up having this. It was a great experience. The meditation, I think, created a really interesting mood. It's a 7-hour show that Oprah was touring. So at that first tour stop in Fort Lauderdale, the Big Quiet segment was about 2 hours into it, and it created this really interesting sort of downward cadence in a day of intensive programming. And a couple of days after the event, and we'd had this great experience. We said bye, have fun on the tour, and then a couple of days after the event, they called. Oprah's producer, Mel, called me and said, we just felt like the segment worked really well and fit in a very meaningful way into the experience. Would you be willing to come on tour with us for the next 10 weeks? And I was like, well, I'll have to check my schedule, see what I can do. And it was just incredible to be able to create that experience for people. And, we did this thing, just to wrap up on it. We were doing a 10-minute guided meditation. The incredible Jackie Cantwell, who's a sound bowl practitioner and critical part of the Big Quiet team. She also runs Medi Club now. She was playing sound bowls for these mass meditations. And what we were doing was, for the last 60 seconds of each meditation, right? 10-minute meditation, last 60 seconds, total silence. So I'd stop my guidance. Jackie would stop the bowls. Oprah would go and sit in the audience at the start of every meditation. So she was meditating with the people. And for these 60 seconds at each arena, it was an indescribable feeling. The silence was so palpable, you could hear it. Just to have that many bodies in one place, intentionally quiet. And it wasn't quiet from a moment of memorializing someone, which is a way that we're used to sharing quiet in large groups. This was a quiet that we moved into after really exploring love, thinking about people that we loved in our lives, sending love to ourselves, sending love to people that we're having challenging experiences with. Those were some of the themes of the meditation, and really giving people permission to just feel their feelings. And then we go into silence. And it was one of these things where, one person coughs, the whole arena hears it. One person laughs, the whole arena hears it. We had no idea if people were going to want to participate or not. People go to this Oprah Stadium show, they get, boxes where they bring all their friends, they're drinking, they're partying. We had no idea if people were going to really show up for this. And at each one of the tour stops, every single one, total and complete silence, everyone participating and bought into the experience. And the only sounds really, besides little coughs here and there, were people crying, were people experiencing their emotions and doing that together. And it was an incredibly gratifying and cool experience to have, and a reminder that these practices in mass hold so much value for an individual, but also for the collective. To be able to be given permission to just feel our feelings together with 15,000 people at a time, it felt pretty cool.
Amazing. Yeah, it's interesting how you talk about how it's normally memorializing minute silence for people who've recently died, or in England there's Remembrance Day where everything stops. So yeah, having that permission and it just being 1 minute and how powerful it can be at 1 minute. It's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
Jesse, I want you to talk maybe a little bit, as we're approaching the end of our time together, about something that I find that you do that's rather significant, in that I think once every 6 months you kind of go for a week on your own and you detach and unplug. And I think you just did that recently, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk a little bit more about why you do this and its impact on your life?
Oh yeah, I'd love to speak to that. My teacher, Johnny Pollard, introduced this practice to me about a year into me doing this work with MediClub and the Big Quiet. And what I was seeing was spending a lot of time in community and leading and gathering people was definitely taking a toll on me. I was starting to feel kind of fatigued from it, but also, just living in this modern day and age, the relationship that we all have with our phones and our devices, the amount of information that, we process on a regular basis, it can be so overwhelming and oftentimes not sustainable. And Johnny had introduced me to this concept of going on a essentially a self-guided silent trip, where for my first one, I rented a little Airbnb in nature, a couple hours outside of LA, and I brought my own food for a week. I don't cook that often, so that was probably the scariest sounding component of it. And upon arrival, turned off the phone, didn't bring my laptop. All I had was a couple of books. One of them was a biography that had been written about Oprah. Keep in mind, this is 5 years ago. And a couple other books, my journal, and a really, really simple outline for how I would structure my days, which was essentially wake up more or less around when the sun would rise, do some free journaling, 30 minutes, just whatever stream of consciousness comes out on the page, meditate, make some breakfast, go on a nature walk. And a nature walk wasn't a hike. You just go for a walk outside my Airbnb, just stroll for a while, come back, rest, maybe take a nap, make lunch, go for another walk, do more journaling, brainstorming, right? Take a long bath, make dinner, read, go to sleep early. That was it for 8 days. And I didn't think that something like that was possible in this day and age, that we could just not do anything or do so little, and that that would actually be beneficial and not something to just feel a tremendous amount of, I'm not productive enough, or feel some sort of intense guilt around. But what I found was that I had created a space with Johnny's guidance where I was in nature without distractions. And what started to happen was, while being in nature in this way, my true nature started to emerge. And what first started to happen, and this is pretty consistent when I do these trips, first day or two in, there's a little bit of an addictive, like a withdrawal around not being with my devices or checking Instagram or whatever, checking text, where I'm kind of like, I want it. And then I go, no, I'm not checking it for a week. And then there's this feeling of, I'm not being productive enough. And then it's like, nope, that's the idea. And I kind of let that go. And then there's really dissonant, uncomfortable stuff that will start to emerge. Something that I haven't, something from a relationship from, 4 relationships ago, years ago, that will come up that I hadn't really addressed, or some new thing around self-doubt that will come back and start to really get me, and it will feel really uncomfortable, and there's no way to distract it. There's no way to push it away. And the practice on these trips is to just be with it, to just let it do its thing. We just process it by letting it come and then go. And when it lifts and goes, which it always does, especially when I'm not trying to fix it or analyze it, on the other side of it is this tremendous amount of, it's either creativity, vision, clear ideas about what I want to do for my work, ways I want to maybe evolve in my relationships, or sometimes, and this is always consistently the case by the time I leave, just this deep sense of appreciation and love for myself. Like I'm my best buddy. It's just the coolest feeling. I go into the trip, oftentimes not liking myself or feeling pretty fried and questioning a lot of things about myself. And I'll leave that week just being like, I love you, bro, to myself. And it's a really, really powerful experience to create that. I get my cup gets so filled up from having that space. And then I return with a new sense of clarity and can go give myself to the world.
That's amazing. I mean, I remember when you were first talking about it, and I did that kind of when I went to India and was studying. For the first 6 weeks, I had agreed that I wasn't going to use my phone or my computer, and it was great. And I have yet to return to even a few days of that. And so I need to hear that story again so I can go, yeah, you need to schedule this week, Derrick. It's like a real thing. Why are you not doing it? So, and I love that, the idea of filling that well again, because it's when we're full, then we can give more to everybody else instead of being depleted and trying to give. So I appreciate being inspired by that.
Thanks for saying that, Derrick. And I think you know this. I have a little starter pack. It's a 2-page PDF that I share with people who want to go off on these journeys. I've sent a lot of people on these journeys. They're really valuable. For those of us that are able to do this with our schedules, feel free to DM me on Instagram at Jesse Israel, and I can send over the starter pack, or I can share it with you guys and put it in the show notes. But I'd love to just see more people going on the journey.
Absolutely. So where is the best place for people to get in contact with you? Is it on Instagram or?
Yeah, Instagram's the best way. I check my DMs. So just my full name, my handle, and then people want to learn more about I do a lot of my work is actually public speaking. And a lot of that's accessible through my website, jesseisrael.com. And then learn about the Big Quiet at the Big Quiet. We've got some live events coming up in fall 2021, and then a big tour coming up in 2022. And yeah, we'd just be stoked to meet people, some of the listeners here when we come to your city or virtually. And also, I just want to acknowledge the three of you for the work that you do as teachers, teaching Vedic meditation. I know, Derrick, you also teach One Giant Mind. It's you guys that really are responsible for so much of the work that I do, the work that my team does. We're all Vedic meditation. We all practice Vedic meditation. And it's the lineage that you three have pushed forward that has really showed us what's possible. And I'm just honored to be on a show that's hosted by teachers of this technique. So I just want to say thank you guys for your work and for you spreading this incredible practice and serving this need in such a meaningful way. So thank you.
Okay, thanks for sticking around until the end. We're always looking for new ways to engage with you, our audience, and would love to know what topics and themes would be of interest to you. Also, who would you like to see as our guests? Perhaps you might be interested in coming on the show and talking with us. We would love to have you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us with a direct message on our Instagram. And for those of you who are not camera shy, please feel free to share a video with the hashtag #TheVedic Conversation. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you found value and benefit in this episode, please share it with your audience and consider giving us a positive review to help others find us.